No such thing as a life that's better than yours. No such thing as a life that's better than yours.
Hi, welcome to Gray Street again. This episode is Getting to Gray Street. This is my testimony, part one. So this is a very short version of the story of how I became a follower of Jesus Christ. Let me start you all the way back to the beginning. The first 23 years of my life, I had a lot of trouble. And I don't just mean a little bit of trouble, I mean a lot. And some of the issues that I have been dealing with are listed here. So by the age of 23, I had been through some sort of circumstance and in one or multiple times have dealt with one or more of these issues, either with my family or myself personally. And so by that point in my life, I was obviously pretty disappointed. Because you're going through all of this, you're going to be struggling. And obviously I was. Now, for me, I was lucky. I was still able to do well in school. So I was still able to graduate from college and get my teaching degree. So by the age of 23, I was working my first job teaching. It was the year 2000. And I got my first job as an English teacher. I was teaching English as a new language in English. And I was teaching in Bloomington, but I was living in Indianapolis. So I was commuting all the way from Bloomington to Indianapolis back and forth. I was able to hold that job pretty well and fairly steadily, but most of the time on the weeknights I was doing drugs, like weaker drugs. I was smoking a lot of pot. And then on the weekends I would do heavier drugs like acid or ecstasy or any number of other, whatever we could get our hands on that was available at the time. So I'm kind of living this life where I'm trying to be responsible during the day and then like being that party girl at night and partying on the weekends and just, running myself ragged. And I would say right around September comes and I'm pretty much thinking this is how I'm going to live my life. And it's about September and I'm driving home from Bloomington to Indianapolis to get home, and I'm commuting from work and I get into a car accident. I don't mean like a regular car accident. One where I'm going 65 miles an hour and the car next to me clips me. I run into the guardrail, spin and do a nice circle in the middle of the highway, get T-boned by a pickup truck, and then spin again and land backwards in the median, in the ditch. And I'm in a convertible while all this happens. Glass is flying everywhere, it's a big mess. After this happens, and of course I'm shaky, but I was okay, I hop out of the convertible because I couldn't open the door because it was so damaged. I hop out of the convertible and jump out like Dukes of Hazzard. And I'm like, what am I going to do? What happened? And I'm all shaky. And out of nowhere, this guy, this old man, is standing right next to me. And it wasn't until later that I thought about, how did this old man get right next to me so fast? But at the time, I wasn't thinking about that. And this old man says to me, you know what? I saw that whole accident and you should be dead. Somebody is looking out for you. I think God might have more planned for you than you realize. And I was just like, okay, thank you. And I'm, sort of nervous. And then he left and I had to talk to some cops. And, you go through all that. It takes hours. It's a big mess. Now, the nice thing is this car was still drivable. How? I don't know how, but it was. So I drive this car home. On my way home, I still have about half an hour drive left. I start thinking about what would have happened if I would have died in this car accident. And that's when I realized there's no way if I had died in that car accident that I would have been in heaven. And I knew it. I knew I wasn't right with God. I knew I had problems. So I knew that there was no way that I could just keep living that way. So I decided I'm going to go on a pursuit for God. I'm going to look for God in every place that there is to look for God. So I start fasting for Ramadan. I start lighting candles. I start chanting. I'm studying New Age mysticism. I'm using those little stones. I'm going back to the Catholic church I went to when I was a kid, even though I hadn't gone in 7 years. I'm going to this Christian church because my mom and my brother had become saved at that time and they were born again Christians. So I went to a church that they were going to too. Now I'm going to be honest with you. For me, Jesus was really not at the top of the list. It was sort of at the bottom. The only reason that I was including it was so that when I did my whole search, I could pick a different religion and then tell my brother and my mom, hey, I tried it out. I wasn't really into the Jesus thing because, one, I'd already tried it out as a Catholic, and it really didn't yield much for me in my life. Obviously, I was still a hot mess after all this. And I hated Jesus freaks because they act like everything's all perfect, and I was like, I can't handle that. So, I wasn't really into it for that reason either. And I was worried about changing my lifestyle, because how am I going to not do drugs anymore? Because that's how I'm medicating my pain from all of this. So, but still, I was really in pursuit of the real God, so I didn't take Jesus out of the equation. I just put him at the bottom of the list. Anyway, I go to this church for my mom. It's a Christian church. This pastor's there. I start listening to the sermon. He starts talking about how we have to obey all of the laws in the land, including the speed limit. And I'm like, yeah, right. How's that going to get me closer to God? So I decide on the way home from my commute in a different car now, because obviously I can't really drive that other one. We're on a commute, and I start thinking, okay, I'm going to test out this speed limit thing. So I test out the speed limit. I go exactly the speed limit all the way home. And I'm not kidding you. If you've ever done it before, everyone will pass you. No one drives the speed limit. Everybody's just passing me by. And I'm thinking, God, how is this getting me closer to you? But after 10 minutes of this, I get so bored because I don't really have to pay attention to my driving. So I start looking up at the sky, and that is the moment when the sun started to set, and the sky started turning all these different colors, and it was beautiful, and I felt a connection to God. And I realized, dang it, maybe this stupid pastor had something, maybe he was telling the truth, and I really didn't like that because I really didn't want Jesus to be the thing. And then I take this stupid test online and they ask you what religion you should be, and I go through all the answers, and that comes out that I should be a Christian too, because I believe in one God and one afterlife. I'm like, dang it, this is really not working. I wanted it to be something else, because I didn't really like that, Jesus freaks think Jesus is the only way to God. There's no other way. I'm like, dang it. Well, I'll try something else. So then I think, okay, about all the people I know, who is the person I know who's the most responsible and has their life together? Probably my brother. So I read this book that he gives me, because he gave me this book. And he says, I want you to read this when you want. And he gave it to me. I left it on my bookshelf. Okay. I'd had it probably a year. I'm not going to lie. I'd had this book like a year and hadn't read it. So I decide, all right, one Saturday morning out of nowhere, okay, it is February 24th, 2001. I get this book off the shelf, and I start to read it. It's called More Than a Carpenter. And in this book, it gives all of the arguments and information about why Jesus is who he says he is, all the historical references and background, all of the intellectual arguments, theological arguments. And then at the very, very end of the book, he explains how, this guy who wrote this book explains how it changed his life. And how Jesus worked for him. And I'm reading it. And I'm not kidding you. When I read about how it changed his life, because the reason that he said he knew it changed him was because there was someone in his family who had sexually abused somebody in his family, a sister, I think it was. And that he forgave that person. And that's when I cried. I just flat out started bawling. Because I thought, I've been through some of that, if you saw on the other board. I had been through that. And I had been through so many things. And I thought, if Jesus can get me in a place where I forgive the people who've wronged me, and get me to a place where I can forgive myself for all the things I've done, it's worth a shot. So on the very last page of the book, there's a prayer. And it invites you, if you believe in Jesus and you believe what he wrote, to say it. I got on my knees that day, and I read it. And that's where my whole life changed. Nothing was ever the same after that. And if you want me to explain exactly how, you're going to have to come back and watch part 2 to find out the next part. And if you want to see the prayer, here it is. So you'll have to come back for part 2 and check out what happens next after I say the prayer. Because those of you who know Jesus or want to know Jesus, you know it doesn't happen overnight. There's a whole process. So come back for part 2, and I'll come back and tell you. So that's how I got to Gray Street, and that's how me and Jesus are friends.
Better than yours, no such thing, no such thing. Heart beating fast, let a nigga know that he alive. Fake niggas, mad snakes, snakes in